I'm going to show you how we can make this off-page content, and we will be using this icon. And when we click it, you can see that the menu is going to slide in from the left-hand side. This is a toggle, so when we click this again, the menu will disappear. And you can use this kind of technique for all sorts of things. It's pretty simple to do with JavaScript, but I did want to show you our final before we get into actually building it. Here's the file that we're going to start working with. You can see my page is not complete at this point, but I did build out some of this so that I could get into the information that I want to share with you a little bit more quickly. I will review what I've done up until this point though, so that you understand how to create a page like this and you'll be familiar with the HTML and the CSS. In regards to the HTML, I am using Google Font and Font Awesome, and I'm also linking out to my own custom style sheet. Inside of the HTML, I have a div which has a class of off-screen wrap, and that contains my navigation. This is an unordered list which contains the logo icon and links to other pages in the website. Then I have a main section, and this contains a header which wraps around the hamburger icon, so that is actually containing this bit of content right here. And then after that, I have just some page content, so we have something on the page. Finally, I'm linking out to my JavaScript at the bottom of the page. I've already created some of the CSS. I am using some CSS variables for colors of the various elements that I'm using. I'm using a universal selector to zero out margin padding and set box sizing to border box. As you can see on body, I've set my font family. I'm increasing the font size slightly for this example. I'm using line height, and then I'm using my color variables to set the background color as well as the text color, and overall I'm setting the font weight. For my H1, I have margin on the top and bottom of 2 rems, right and left of auto, and I'm reducing the font weight a little bit to 300. I just have a general image rule that is going to ensure that my images are responsive. I have some padding and a max width on main, and this is just to prevent main section from getting too wide if my page is very large. In addition to that, I have my nav toggle hover and my nav toggle active. This just makes the color of the hamburger menu change when it's hovered over, and also changes the cursor into a pointer. Then I have some rules for my off-screen wrapper, which is this area right here. You can see that I've changed the background color. I have some margin settings just to create some space overall, and we'll see that come into play once we complete this, but there is 5 rems of space up at the top. I have some rules on the links, and that's just setting the color and adding some padding and using a display of block. So you not only have to click right on the text, but you can click to the right of the text in the menu to make it a little bit easier to click. I have a rule that's setting the hover color, and finally I'm resizing my logo down by giving it a max width and some padding on the right. So now that you see what I have so far, let's go ahead and let's see how we can add a little bit more CSS so that we can set the page up correctly, and how we can add our JavaScript to make this fully interactive. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my off-screen wrap, and I'm going to add some new rules here. We're going to change our position to fixed. We're going to add top of 0 and bottom of 0. This will ensure that this area is going to span the entire height of my web page. I'm going to set a width property, and whatever width property you end up using, you're going to need to actually take note of this. I'll just show you what this looks like so far. So you can see how it's made this so that it takes up the entire height of my page, and I'm using a width. Currently, because this is fixed, the rest of the content is sliding underneath it, but we don't need to worry about that because we're actually going to move this off screen. I'm going to do that by using a left property, and I'm going to set this to -12 rems, which happens to match the overall width exactly. So if we refresh our page, you're going to see that that off-screen wrapper is going to completely disappear from view. So this is what the page is going to normally look like. Now what we need to do is we need to create a class that is going to allow the menu to appear, and we're going to use JavaScript to do that, but I need to create some CSS in order to actually have that occur. So what I will do is I'm going to make a rule, and we'll just put it right here. And this is going to be called off-screen open. I'm going to make a class of off-screen open. I'm going to target both main, and we're going to make a group selector, and we're going to use off-screen open, and then we'll target our off-screen wrap. So the two elements that I'm targeting, which will go ahead and occur if there's a parent element of off-screen open, are going to be main, which contains the main content, along with our hamburger item, so everything we currently are seeing on the page, and then the off-screen wrapper, which contains our navigation, which I just moved off the page by positioning left to be -12. So now that I have this here, I'm simply going to use transform, and we're going to say translate, and then in parentheses we're going to pass in our 12 rems. So this will allow, when this class is on a particular element, these things will appear. And I can quickly show you this by simply going into my HTML. And if we go ahead and add this class to the body and save our page, you'll see that this space is now going to display our navigation pane, and everything has been scooted over by 12 rems. I just wanted to show you how we're going to make this work, and we're going to have this happen a little more dynamically by incorporating this into our JavaScript. So I'm going to delete this from body, and then we'll go back to what we had previously. Now that I have that in place, I'm going to come to my JavaScript, and we'll add a little bit of JavaScript so we can create this interactivity. I'm going to start off by creating two variables. The first one is going to be called toggle button, and I'm going to make this equal to document.querySelector, and then I want to actually target the hamburger icon. And if we go into our HTML, you can see that I have assigned a class of nav toggle to this particular element. So I'm going to use that, and I'll say .nav toggle. So now I have a way with a variable that I can actually target this particular element. We're going to do something similar, and we're just going to create another variable called body, and this is going to be equal to our document body. So now I have those two variables in place, and now I can use them. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to use the toggle button, and we're going to add an event listener. I'm going to be listening for a click, and if the click is felt, I want to run a function. I'm going to use underscore, and then we'll use equal greater than, which is going to allow me to take advantage of using arrow functions, which allow us to consolidate our code just a little bit. So instead of having to write out the word function, we can just go ahead and add this in. If you have ever used arrow functions before, you're probably used to seeing something that looks like this. The arrow function syntax allows for a concise way of defining functions, especially when they have single parameters and a single expression in their body. The syntax for an arrow function with a single parameter looks like this, but if the function body consists of only a single expression, you can omit the curly braces and the return keyword like this. And when we see an arrow function that is written like this with the underscore and then the arrow function, it means that the function takes a single parameter but does not use it in the function body. The underscore character is often used as a placeholder for a variable that's not actually used in the code. So the underscore in this little snippet right here signifies that the parameter is not used in the function body. And this just allows us to be more concise as we write our code. So inside of my curly braces, I'm going to say body.classList, and we're going to say .toggle. So this means that this is something that can be on and off. And then in the parentheses, we're going to assign the class name that we want. So in our case, we're going to call this off-screen open. And what this is going to do is that when we click our button, it is going to toggle the off-screen open to the body element. And I can show you this by simply going into my inspector. And if we look at the body element, which is right here, you can see that that class doesn't exist. But when we click on this particular element, you can see how the class is now added. And if I click this again, the class is going to be removed. And as you can see, it's moving content over by 12 rems. The reason that this is being moved is because if this particular class exists, we have created some of our CSS that is going to transform these particular elements and move them over by 12 rems. So that takes care of that part. And then in order for us to actually have that main content slide in, we're actually going to go back to our CSS. In my off-screen wrap selector that I already have, I'm going to add a transition. And the property that we want to transition is going to be transform. I'm going to have this happen over half a second, and I'm going to use ease out so it has a little bit more of a natural sort of animation. If we save this now and we refresh in the browser, when we click on this little icon, you can see that this side area, our off-screen wrapper, is going to slide in, and then we would have access to any of these links. Because this is a toggle, if I click it again, you can see how that slides away. So this is working, but I would like to smooth out the behavior a little bit. You can see that we have a nice smooth movement on the off-screen wrapper, but if you keep an eye on our main area, you can see that that just kind of jumps from the left to the right. So let's go ahead and smooth that out, and we can easily do this by just adding the same property that we used on our off-screen wrap to main. So I'm going to come up here to main, and we'll just use this exact same line of code. And if we save now and we refresh, you'll see that when we click this, the whole page is going to slide to the right. And when we click it again, the whole page slides to the left. This allows us to create a really smooth animation, and it's a great way to tuck content, whether it's the navigation itself or perhaps something else on your page, so that it's off screen and it doesn't appear until the user interacts in some way. The final thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of animation to the hover state of my hamburger icon right here. And all we're going to really need to do is just add another selector for .nav toggle. I'm going to set the color to whatever I want the initial color to be. So in my case, I'm going to use one of my variables, and I'm going to use the menu background color. And now that I have that in place, I will add a transition. And what we want to transition here is going to be color. I'm going to have this happen a little bit faster, so we'll say 0.3 seconds. And once again, we are going to use the ease out. If we save this now and we refresh, you're going to see that when I hover over, I get a nice kind of fade in and a fade out from this color. So it's just not quite as abrupt, and everything else is still going to work. So I hope you enjoyed creating this little off-screen menu and adding a couple of enhancements so that we can make this work in a more smooth and visually pleasing manner.